So you remember the Brexit vote, right? Well, when the UK voted to leave the EU, it didn't just cause a political earthquake. It uncovered this massive constitutional puzzle. The result of the vote was clear, but how to actually do it? That led to a huge question. In the UK, who really holds the power? So boom, the referendum happens. It's close, 52 to 48%, but the people have spoken, the political direction was set. But the actual legal path to get there? Yeah, that was a giant, blinking question mark. And that right there is the million-dollar question. Who gets to pull the trigger? Is it the government acting on behalf of the people's vote? Or does it have to be Parliament? You know, the place that makes all the laws in the first place. And this wasn't just some tiny legal detail. This was about who fundamentally runs the show. Now, this wasn't your typical political showdown with shouting matches in Parliament. No, this fight was different. It moved from the House of Commons into the courtroom. This was a deep constitutional question about the very rulebook of how the UK is governed. Okay, so the government, led by Theresa May at the time, decided to just go for it. They announced they were going to trigger Article 50, that's the official "we're leaving" button, all by themselves. But almost instantly, a group of citizens, with Gina Miller as the lead claimant, filed a lawsuit saying, whoa, not so fast. So what was the government's argument? How could they claim they had the power to do this without Parliament? Well, it all came down to this very old, kind of mysterious, and very British power called the royal prerogative. The easiest way to think about the royal prerogative is like an ancient toolbox of powers. They used to belong to the king or queen, but over time, they've been handed down to the government. It's what lets them do things like deploy the armed forces, make treaties, and handle foreign policy, all without asking Parliament for a vote every single time. So the government's logic was, on the surface, pretty simple. Their lawyers basically said, look, 1, making and breaking international treaties is a classic prerogative power. 2, our entire EU membership is built on treaties. So, 3, it follows that we can use that same power to leave the EU. Seems straightforward, right? Case closed? Well, not quite. Because the people challenging the government had an ace up their sleeve. Their entire case rested on an even more fundamental principle of the UK Constitution, really the biggest one of all. And that's parliamentary sovereignty. This is the bedrock. It's the absolute core of the whole system. What it means, in plain English, is that Parliament is the boss. It can make or unmake any law it wants, and nobody, not the government, not the courts, can overrule it. And the key thing is, what Parliament has given in law, only Parliament can take away. So here's the clash. You see it, right? It's this epic constitutional deadlock. On one side, you have the government's power to deal with foreign affairs. On the other, you have Parliament's total control over the law inside the UK. Brexit was stuck right in the middle, and the court had to decide which of these massive powers would win out. And here's how the challengers connected the dots. They argued that joining the EU wasn't just some foreign treaty. It was brought into UK law by a huge act of Parliament back in 1972. And that act gave British people actual, concrete rights, like the freedom to move and work across Europe. They said if the government used the prerogative to leave the EU, it would just vaporize those rights. And their killer point was, you can't use an ancient foreign policy power to change laws and take away rights here at home. That's a job for Parliament, and Parliament only. And just like that, the stage was set for a truly historic showdown. It all came down to 11 judges in the UK Supreme Court to untangle this massive constitutional knot and give the final answer. The case, known as Miller versus the Secretary of State, became one of the most important constitutional cases in a generation. You could feel the entire country holding its breath, waiting for the decision. And the result? Well, it was decisive. By a vote of 8-3, the Supreme Court ruled against the government. The verdict was clear. Parliament had to be involved. This quote from Lord Neuberger, the head of the court at the time, just cuts right through all the noise. He's saying that even with a referendum, you can't just ignore the country's fundamental rulebook. The only way to legally make this happen was the proper way, through a new law passed by Parliament. So in plain English, what the court decided was that leaving the EU wasn't just tearing up a treaty. It was going to fundamentally change the law of the land and take away rights that Parliament had created. And that, they said, is a power that belongs to Parliament alone. Look, this ruling was always about way more than just Brexit. Its impact is still being felt today because it basically redrew the power map between the government, Parliament, and the courts. So what are the big takeaways? Well, first, it put a giant exclamation point on parliamentary sovereignty, confirming it's the top dog in the UK Constitution. It also put clear limits on those old prerogative powers. It was a massive demonstration of the judiciary doing its job, upholding the law without getting political. And this is so important. The court never said the UK couldn't leave the EU. They were just focused on how it could be done lawfully, according to the UK's own rules. It was about process, not politics. And all of this leaves us with a much bigger and honestly a much trickier question that's still being debated today. In our world of deep political divides, what is the right balance between the will of the people from a vote, the power of the government they elect, and the duty of unelected judges to just enforce the law? This case didn't solve that puzzle for good, but it absolutely forced everyone to think about it.